Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing ankle-deep in the cold brown mud of a medieval road, just beyond the walls of a small market town where a wedding feast is about to begin. River mist hangs low across the fields. Hoarse breath clouds the winter air, and torchlight trembles against wet stone as travellers squeeze through the gate before it closes. Your boots are already heavy with mud. Damp straw clings to your cloak, and smoke from nearby chimneys gathers beneath the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, monastery bells mark the hour, slow and solemn, while geese complain from a yard as if medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here without discovering that warm socks are more valuable than heroic courage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what the local time is where you are tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move beneath the town gate just as two guards begin dragging the heavy oak doors inward. Their iron hinges groan like tired cattle. One guard carries a lantern protected by thin horn panels, while the other leans on a spear and watches a cart struggle through the mud behind you. The cart belongs to a family arriving for tomorrow's wedding, though at the moment it looks less like a vehicle of celebration and more like a wooden argument with the road. One wheel is cracked near the rim. The driver mutters beneath his breath while a shaggy dog trots faithfully behind the axle, apparently confident that this disaster is part of the entertainment. You help push for a few steps, your hands pressing against damp timber, and soon the cart lurches onto firmer ground. Inside are folded wool blankets, 2 wicker baskets of onions, a small keg of ale, several loaves wrapped in cloth, and a goose that seems personally offended by marriage. Wedding guests do not arrive empty-handed if they can help it. Food, drink, cloth, candles, firewood, and household goods may all be brought to ease the burden of feeding a crowd. A feast can consume a surprising portion of a household's winter stores, particularly when reputation demands generosity. Nothing says marital happiness quite like discovering that half the salted pork has disappeared before January. Ahead, the town street narrows between timber houses whose upper floors lean toward one another above the lane. Water trickles along a shallow gutter. Behind shutters, candlelight glows amber. A woman shakes old rushes from a doorway while another carries fresh bundles inside to spread over the floor before guests arrive. The rushes will soften the stone, absorb spills, and collect whatever crumb, mud, ash, and bits of straw the wedding company produces tomorrow. Herbs may be mixed among them, sweet woodruff, rosemary, mint, so that each footstep releases a faint, clean fragrance beneath the stronger smells of smoke, wet wool, cooking fat, and humanity. You follow the sound of bells toward a crowded alehouse near the market square. Inside, the ceiling beams are black with soot. Men and women crowd benches around the hearth, warming hands around wooden cups. A pot of pottage simmers over the fire, thick with peas, onions, and grain. Someone has hung wet cloaks near the flames, creating the unmistakable perfume of steaming wool. At one table sits an ink-stained clerk from the manor court, carefully guarding a leather pouch of documents from spilled ale. At another, 2 pilgrims display pewter badges sewn onto their hats, souvenirs from distant shrines. One wears the scallop shell associated with Santiago, though no one can quite agree whether he truly walked so far or merely purchased the badge from someone who did. Near the fire, talk circles endlessly around tomorrow's marriage. Some swear that the weather before a wedding carries meaning. Rain can suggest blessing in one village and trouble in another. A clear morning may be welcome, unless the wind comes from an unlucky direction. A crow on a roof causes one old woman to cross herself. A spider discovered on a wedding garment, according to a younger woman nearby, can mean unexpected fortune. Those who tell these things never fully agree, which does not prevent anyone from believing them enthusiastically. The bride's family has already sent someone to inspect the road to the church. Another servant has carried bundles of rosemary indoors. Rosemary is useful for scent, memory, blessing, cooking, and apparently almost any occasion during which medieval people feel nervous. Outside again, you cross the market square. Stalls stand empty beneath canvas covers, but preparation continues around them. A butcher's apprentice carries a basket toward the manor kitchen. Two boys old enough to work but kept well away from the wedding ale roll a barrel beneath an archway. Near the well, women fill wooden buckets while exchanging news about which noble guest might arrive before dawn. Beyond the rooftops rises the manor hall where the feast will take place. Its windows shine through the mist. Servants move in and out beneath the gate carrying baskets, bundles of kindling, trenchers, pottery jugs, and sacks of flour. The kitchen fire has already been burning for hours. Roasting irons rest beside the hearth. Salted meat has been taken down from storage. Spices are counted carefully because pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and saffron are expensive enough that using them generously becomes a performance of wealth. Near the manor wall stands a little roadside shrine containing a weathered image of a saint beneath a wooden canopy. Someone has placed a sprig of greenery there. Someone else has left a small coin. You pause only briefly, because another bell sounds from the abbey beyond the river. The evening is deepening now. Frost begins to form along the edges of the ruts in the road, turning yesterday's mud hard and silver beneath your boots. The dog from the broken cart has somehow found you again. He sits nearby with complete confidence, as though you have clearly been assigned to him. You pull your cloak tighter. Tomorrow there will be music, food, blessings, shouting, drinking, bargaining, laughter, nervous glances, old superstitions, and rituals so strange that even some of the guests will not remember why they perform them. But tonight, before any vows are spoken, the town waits. Candles burn behind shutters. The manor kitchen glows. The monastery bells fade into the winter mist. And somewhere in a small chamber above the street, surrounded by women, wool cloth, herbs, pins, and whispered advice, the bride begins to prepare. You climb the narrow wooden stair above the street while the last of the evening bells tremble through the cold air, and the sound seems to follow you into the little chamber where the bride is being made ready. The room is not grand, though it is full. A low fire snaps in the hearth. A tallow lamp burns beside two beeswax candles, the better candles saved for the occasion, and their soft, honeyed scent almost manages to overcome the smell of damp wool cloaks drying near the wall. Rushes lie fresh on the floor, scattered with rosemary and a little lavender, and everywhere there are signs that a household has spent half the day trying to turn ordinary life into ceremony. A stout aunt sits on a chest with the authority of a bishop and twice the determination. A younger cousin kneels near a basket of ribbons. An older woman with red hands from washing linen sorts pins into a wooden bowl as if the future of Christendom depends upon neat fastening. The bride herself stands near the fire in her shift, pale with the cold and with that particular wedding stillness that is made of equal parts excitement, duty, and the suspicion that everybody in the room knows something you do not. You warm your hands for a moment and watch as the women begin the quiet work. Medieval weddings are not always about a splendid new gown appearing from nowhere like a miracle from a tailor's dream. More often, the bride wears the best garments her family can assemble. Some pieces are newly sewn, others are inherited, borrowed, altered, or carefully preserved from another woman's marriage day. One green wool gown, lined at the collar with fur, has belonged first to an elder sister, then to a cousin, and now comes out again with fresh stitching and a new set of sleeves. The cloth is good enough that no one apologizes for its history. In fact, its history is part of the blessing. There is comfort in cloth that has already survived one marriage, perhaps two. Some swear that fabric worn by a fortunate wife carries a little of that good fortune in its threads. Others say the opposite and insist that too much old sorrow can cling to old garments like smoke in rafters. No one can quite agree whether a wedding dress should be entirely new or pleasantly haunted by the domestic successes of the family line. The aunt votes for experience. The cousin votes for luck. The bride sensibly votes for whatever is warmest. The gown is drawn over her head. It falls in heavy folds to her ankles, russet in the firelight with narrow bands of darker trimming at the cuffs. A wool kirtle goes beneath, then a belt of woven braid. A white veil, fine but not luxurious, is unfolded from linen wrapping and held near the hearth to soften the creases. The older woman makes the sign of the cross over it before laying it across the bride's hair. She does it quickly, almost secretly, like someone salting stew when she thinks no one is looking. Hair matters. Pins matter even more. A marriage feast can survive an overcooked pie, a drunken uncle, or a muddy boot on the rushes, but a falling headdress seems to provoke a degree of alarm usually reserved for siege engines. Pins are taken from a cushion one by one and pressed into place. The cousin counts them aloud under her breath. Even now, it is hard to tell whether she counts for neatness or because she fears odd numbers. Some women insist an odd number of pins brings discord. Others prefer odd numbers precisely because evil spirits, being gloomy creatures, supposedly delight in orderly sets and can be confused by one extra fastening. Medieval logic is often less a straight road and more a goat path through fog. On the bed lies a little collection of objects meant to protect the bride from misfortune. There is a sprig of rosemary, a small bunch of rue, and a clove of garlic wrapped in cloth so the smell does not become the evening's dominant memory. Garlic protects against sickness, envy, and, as judging by the aunt's face, also against anyone sitting too close. There is a tiny cross carved from wood, to be tucked into the bride's girdle. There is a narrow red ribbon to tie beneath the sleeve. Hidden from casual view, in some places red turns away the evil eye, in others blue serves the same purpose. Here the family has chosen red, perhaps because red is what they have, and necessity has always enjoyed a close friendship with tradition. A little pouch of dried herbs is sewn discreetly into the lining near the hem. The older woman says it eases nerves. The aunt says it helps with fertility. The cousin says it keeps witches away. All three may be true, or at least no one feels inclined to test the matter by removing it. Then come the borrowed things, though they are not always named in any neat set the way later centuries may prefer. A silver brooch is pinned at the shoulder. It has belonged to the bride's mother before her, and to her mother before that, worn on feast days and high holy days, carried through lean winters and better harvests. The metal is slightly worn at the edge where hands have touched it for years. When the bride fastens it, she's not merely being adorned. She is being threaded into the family itself, secured like cloth beneath a clasp. From a chest comes a comb of polished bone. It is worked gently through her hair beneath the veil. A woman murmurs that no bride should leave loose strands if they can be helped, because some swear that wandering hairs invite wandering affection. That may be superstition, or merely the revenge of tidy people, which can be just as powerful. The bride sits now on the edge of the bed while one woman adjusts her hem and another checks the laces at her sleeve. Her hands, you notice, are cold. Someone rubs them with a little rosemary water. Someone else presses warm, spiced ale into her fingers and tells her to drink. It is suggested that she eat a little bread too, because fainting at the church door may be dramatic, but it is inconvenient to everyone and deeply unfair to the musicians. The room grows quieter. Below, faintly, you hear a dog bark in the lane, and you suspect it is the same suspicious creature from the broken cart, still making his rounds like a four-legged steward. Outside the shutter, wind brushes the wall. Somewhere farther off a bell sounds once from the abbey, a small reminder that time keeps moving whether households are ready or not. The bride rises again. Her gown is smoothed, her veil is set, her herbs, ribbons, tokens, and inherited blessings are all tucked into place. She looks not transformed exactly, but steadied, as though many hands, many hopes, and many old customs have wrapped themselves around her against the dark. And standing there in the warmth of the little chamber, with candles bending softly in their pools of wax and the smell of rosemary rising underfoot, you begin to understand that before the feast, before the music, before the noise of celebration, marriage first passes through this small, crowded stillness of cloth, breath, whispered warnings, and careful human hands. Morning comes pale and damp, almost reluctantly, with a thin grey light filtering between the shutters and the sound of hooves striking wet stone below. You step back into the lane just as the town begins to stir in earnest. Smoke rises from chimneys in low blue ribbons. The frost that silvered the road before dawn has already surrendered to mud, and every cartwheel leaves a dark groove behind it, somewhere near the market square. A rooster calls with the exhausted confidence of a creature that has been doing this for generations without once being thanked. The wedding procession gathers slowly. Nothing about it is especially orderly. Men adjust belts and cloaks. Women pull hoods over carefully arranged hair. A fiddler tests his strings beneath an awning while a pipe player warms stiff fingers over a brazier. The bride emerges from the house with her veil pinned neatly in place, rosemary hidden among the folds of her clothing, and the old silver brooch catching what little morning light the sky is willing to offer. Beside her walks an older kinswoman carrying a small bundle wrapped in linen. The groom waits farther down the street with several companions. He wears his best wool coat, though one sleeve has clearly been mended. His boots are cleaner than yours, which is irritating because you have been here longer. Before anyone moves, there is a pause. A woman crosses herself. Someone checks the sky. Someone else looks toward the rooftops for birds. Some swear that meeting certain animals on the road to church can influence the fortune of the marriage. A hare crossing the path may inspire nervous whispers. A black bird might be interpreted one way by an aunt and another by a grandmother. A dog is generally less mysterious, especially when it's the same shaggy creature that followed the broken cart last night and has now attached himself to the procession with complete confidence. No one invited him. He appears deeply unconcerned. The musicians begin. The fiddle leads with a thin, lively tune while the pipe follows in a softer rhythm, and the little company starts toward the church. The procession is part ceremony, part family parade, and part practical method of transporting half the town from one doorway to another without losing anyone in the mud. You walk near the middle. The bride's relatives keep close around her, their fur-lined cloaks brushing together as the street narrows. Neighbours lean from doors and windows to watch. A cooper raises his cup. A baker dusted in flour steps outside holding a wooden peel. An elderly man near the well removes his cap, while 3 market women pause beside baskets of leeks and onions to inspect every garment with the calm precision of people who will discuss them for months. Marriage is private in feeling but remarkably public in practice. The whole town seems determined to witness it. At the first corner, a group of local youths has stretched a ribbon across the lane. They grin beneath damp hoods and refuse to move until the groom offers a coin or some small payment. Such playful barriers are not unheard of. In some places, neighbours demand drink, money, or food before allowing a wedding party to pass. Whether this is an ancient custom or simply an excellent excuse to collect ale is difficult to establish. The groom sighs and produces 2 small coins. The ribbon drops immediately. Tradition, it appears, has a price. You continue toward the eastern gate, where the road climbs slightly past workshops and storage sheds. A smith stands outside his forge with sparks drifting behind him. Iron has its own strange place in old beliefs. Some people consider it protective against harmful spirits or bad luck, and a few wedding travellers touch the iron fitting of the gate as they pass. No one can quite agree whether this is necessary. Several people do it anyway. Beyond the wall, the road becomes rougher. Fields stretch beneath the winter sky, brown and silver beneath frost. Bare hedges line the path. A distant abbey rises through mist, its tower just visible above a stand of leafless trees. The bells begin again, slow notes rolling across the low ground. You pass a roadside shrine built beneath an old oak. Inside the shallow wooden niche stands a painted saint darkened by weather and candle smoke. Wax drips hard along the shelf. Someone has left 2 hazelnuts, a copper coin, and a strip of faded cloth as offerings. The bride pauses while her kinswoman adjusts the veil. A pilgrim already kneels there. His cloak is patched, and several little badges hang from his hat. One appears to show a saint's head. Another is shaped like a shell. He rises, makes room for the wedding party, and gives them a blessing before continuing down the road. The bride leaves a small sprig of rosemary. The groom leaves nothing, then notices several women looking at him and immediately adds a coin. Wisdom often arrives through observation. The road enters a strip of woodland where the mud deepens beneath fallen leaves. The musicians stop playing because keeping a fiddle dry while stepping around puddles is beyond even the most committed professional. Horse breath drifts white between the trees. Rooks move through the branches overhead. Then a light rain begins. At once, opinions appear. One woman says rain on a wedding road is fortunate because it binds the marriage tightly. Another says too much rain means tears. A third insists that only rain from the west matters. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but every face turns upward for a moment as though heaven might kindly provide footnotes. The shower is brief. Droplets cling to the bride's veil like little beads of glass. Her companions tuck the cloth closer around her shoulders and keep walking. The road soon bends toward the church, whose stone tower stands above a cluster of yews and grave markers. More people wait there. Beggars sit near the wall, knowing that weddings may loosen purses. A lame veteran holds out a wooden bowl. An old woman offers tiny bunches of herbs tied with thread. The groom's family distributes coarse bread and a few coins, partly from charity and partly because generosity on a wedding day is considered a sensible investment in reputation. blessing and future memory. The shaggy dog receives a crust too. He accepts it as his rightful portion. The churchyard gate stands open ahead. The music starts again. You hear laughter behind you, bells before you, and the wet shuffle of dozens of boots on the path. The bride lowers her eyes for a moment, then looks toward the heavy church door where the vows will soon be spoken. And you follow with the rest, carrying mud, rain, rosemary scent, old warnings, public curiosity, and half a town's expectations toward the worn stone threshold. You enter the churchyard beneath a dripping yew tree while the last notes of the fiddle fade behind you. The rain has stopped, but drops still fall from branches in slow, cold taps onto hoods and shoulders. Mud clings to everyone's boots. The bride's veil is damp at the edge. The groom's repaired sleeve has darkened with moisture. And the shaggy dog from the road sits just outside the gate with the expression of a creature who has attended enough human ceremonies to know that eventually someone will drop food. Ahead, the church door stands open beneath a rounded stone arch. The building is small compared with the great abbey beyond the river, but after the low cottages and muddy lanes it feels solemn enough. Weather has softened the carved faces above the doorway. Moss grows between stones near the foundation. A little holy water stoop is fixed beside the entrance, and beeswax candles flicker within the dim interior beyond. Yet the wedding does not begin inside. The company gathers before the door. In much of medieval Europe, important parts of marriage may be performed at or near the church entrance, where vows can be witnessed publicly before the couple proceeds inside for blessing and mass. The threshold becomes a curious border between everyday village life and sacred space, between negotiation and sacrament, between muddy boots outside and incense within. You find yourself standing among relatives, neighbours, servants, and several people who appear to have arrived simply because anything involving free food later deserves careful observation now. The priest steps forward. His vestments are heavier than ordinary clothing, layered against both ceremony and cold. A young assistant carries a book while another holds a small vessel. Near them waits the manor clerk you saw last night, his fingers already ink-stained despite the early hour. He keeps a pouch of documents beneath his cloak, guarding them from rain with greater tenderness than some men reserve for family. The bride and groom stand together beneath the arch. For a moment, the crowd becomes quieter. Marriage customs vary from place to place, and even now no one can quite agree whether every gesture performed here carries equal legal or religious weight. Promises exchanged in the present tense can matter enormously. Consent matters. Witnesses matter. Families, property, dowries, and local expectations matter too, which means that romance has brought several administrative friends along. The priest asks the couple to declare their intentions. The groom answers first. The bride answers after him. Their words are simple compared with the elaborate feast waiting at the manor, but everyone listens closely. There are no musicians now, no clattering trenchers, no cups raised in laughter, only breath misting in the cool air and the distant drip of water from the roof. Then comes the ring. It is small, plain, and more valuable for meaning than ornament. The groom takes the bride's hand. Her fingers are pale with cold, and you remember the women rubbing them with rosemary water beside the hearth. Some traditions place the ring upon different fingers in sequence before it comes to rest on the chosen one. Some link the movement to sacred words. Others preserve local habits whose origins are already becoming uncertain, even among those who perform them. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether every gesture is ancient or simply old enough that nobody wants to be the first person to stop doing it. The priest blesses the ring. The groom slides it into place. A woman behind you whispers that dropping the ring would be unfortunate. Naturally, everyone watches his fingers at once. He does not drop it. A remarkably large number of people relax. Coins appear next. In certain marriage rites, the groom may offer money or symbolic payment connected with the marriage settlement, dowry arrangements, or the bride's financial rights. Here, several small silver coins are placed briefly into the bride's hand before being entrusted to one of her kin. It is not a dramatic fortune. Still, silver carries weight. A household depends upon land, livestock, tools, cloth, stored grain, obligations, and promises every bit as much as affection. The coins remind everyone that a medieval marriage joins not only two people but property, families, duties, inheritance, and expectations stretching far beyond this cold doorway. Near the bride's feet lies a small cloth spread to keep her hem from the worst mud. Someone has scattered a few grains upon it. Barley, perhaps, or wheat. Grain appears often in marriage custom because it carries an obvious hope, abundance, fertility, full storehouses, children, and enough bread to make winter seem less threatening. One old woman takes a kernel from the ground and slips it into a purse. Some swear that grain gathered from beneath a bride's feet can bring luck to an unmarried woman. The old woman looks at least 70. You decide not to ask. The priest lifts his hand in blessing. The couple bows their heads. A small cross is traced over them. Holy water touches their clothing in cold droplets. The bride closes her eyes briefly. The groom blinks as one drop lands very near his nose and manages, with admirable discipline, not to look offended by divine moisture. Then a narrow cloth is placed across their joined hands. The gesture is simple, but the meaning is clear enough even without explanation. Two hands are bound together before witnesses. Two households are being tied into a new arrangement. A promise made privately may be whispered away. A promise made here is carried by every person who sees it. Behind you, the monastery bells begin again. Their sound drifts across the fields and over the churchyard wall. The priest finishes the words at the doorway and turns toward the interior. Now the company moves inside. You duck beneath the arch with everyone else. The change is immediate. Outside lies grey morning, wet wool, mud, and horse breath. Inside lies dim amber light, stone columns, old painted saints, smoke from candles, and the faint sweetness of incense lingering near the altar. Your boots sound softly against worn paving stones. The bride and groom proceed forward. You notice tiny objects everywhere, a pilgrim badge pinned near one woman's shoulder, a rosary looped around another wrist, a little wax offering shaped like a hand near a side chapel, and a reliquary behind ironwork containing something said to belong to a local saint. Whether the relic is genuine is a matter no one is eager to discuss in front of the priest. Still, several wedding guests glance toward it. Some swear that praying near a saint's relic on a wedding day strengthens the union. Others say certain saints are especially helpful with childbirth, household peace, or stubborn husbands, which suggests medieval heaven maintains a surprisingly specialized administration. The ceremony continues quietly. Prayers rise. The couple kneels. Candles tremble. And when at last you turn again toward the church door, the cold world outside is still waiting exactly where you left it. But the two people standing before you are now recognized differently by family, village, church, and law. The bells ring once more. The heavy door opens, and everyone begins to move toward the feast. You step back through the church door into a world that seems brighter than it did an hour ago. The clouds have thinned, leaving a pale wash of winter sun across the churchyard, and the wet stones shine beneath your boots. Behind you, incense still clings faintly to your cloak. Ahead, the wedding company is already rearranging itself for the walk toward the manor, everyone talking at once now that solemn silence is no longer required. The bride draws her fur-lined cloak close around her shoulders. The groom looks relieved. The shaggy dog rises from beside the gate, stretches, and falls into line as though the priest has personally blessed his attendance. Before the procession can properly begin, an elderly woman from the bride's family appears carrying a round loaf wrapped in clean linen. The bread is dark, coarse, and heavy, made from a mixture of grains rather than the fine white wheat bread reserved for wealthier tables. She breaks off a small piece and offers it first to the bride, then to the groom. They each eat. Bread is daily survival made visible. Grain planted in cold earth becomes harvest, flour, dough, and finally the food that keeps a household alive through winter. It is little wonder that bread finds its way into marriage customs. To share it at the beginning of married life is to express a quiet wish that the new household never lacks enough to eat. Some swear that the first piece should be broken rather than cut, because iron ought not divide what has just been joined. Others say that is nonsense and reach for the nearest knife. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such customs begin as solemn belief, or as something one grandmother insisted upon so forcefully that nobody dared question her afterward. A few crumbs fall onto the bride's cloak. Her cousin brushes them away, then stops. She collects one instead. The little crumb disappears into the fold of her glove. Luck, apparently, is too valuable to waste on laundry. The procession moves out through the churchyard gate and returns along the same muddy road. But it feels different now. Bells ring behind you. The musicians begin again. Their fiddle and pipe sound brighter in the open air, skipping above the squelch of boots and the creak of carts. At the roadside shrine beneath the oak, the bride pauses only long enough to touch 2 fingers to the little wooden cross hidden beneath her cloak. The groom, perhaps remembering yesterday's watchful women, places another coin beside the saint. He has learned quickly. Marriage may already be improving him. Farther along, a farmer waits beside the road holding a shallow wooden bowl filled with grain. As the couple approaches, he tosses a small handful before their feet. Wheat and barley scatter across the mud, some grains vanishing instantly beneath boots. The gesture draws laughter. A few children watch from behind a fence, kept well away from the procession itself, but delighted by anything being thrown for no obvious reason. Chickens discover the grain shortly afterward and begin their own celebration, which is perhaps the most practical interpretation of fertility symbolism anyone has offered all morning. Grain can mean plenty. It can mean children. It can mean fields that ripen instead of failing beneath rain, frost, insects, or war. In a world where an empty storehouse can turn winter cruel, abundance is not an abstract blessing. You can smell it in flour. You can hear it in a mill wheel. You can feel it in the comforting weight of sacks stacked safely behind an oak door. The manor appears beyond the town wall by late morning. Smoke rises from its kitchen roof. Servants hurry across the yard, carrying wood and water. Near the outer gate, 2 women are waiting with jugs of ale. This, too, becomes ceremony. The bride receives a wooden cup first. She drinks only a little, then passes it to the groom. He drinks and hands it back. The cup moves among several close relatives before returning to the waiting servant. Sharing drink can symbolize hospitality and union. but it also solves the very medieval problem of having more thirsty people than cups. The ale is cloudy, mildly sour, and pleasantly warming. You receive a cup farther back in the procession. It tastes of grain, smoke, and a faint bitterness from herbs. No one has chilled it. No one apologizes. The medieval cellar has not yet discovered the luxury of customer complaints. Closer to the manor entrance, the strange little ceremonies multiply. A servant carries a small bunch of keys on an iron ring. They are heavy, blackened with use, and large enough to suggest that medieval locks are designed partly for security and partly for making sure nobody forgets who controls the pantry. One key belongs to a storage room, another to a chest. Another may open an inner household door. The eldest woman of the groom's household takes the ring and places it briefly in the bride's hands. She does not surrender every key permanently. The gesture is more symbolic than literal, but its meaning is difficult to miss. The bride is entering not merely a marriage but a household economy. Food must be counted, linen must be stored, servants must be directed, candles, salt, grain, cloth, and fuel all have to last. A well-kept key can represent authority. A lost key can represent an extremely unpleasant afternoon. Some households maintain customs in which the new wife is shown the storeroom, hearth, or pantry soon after arrival. Others give symbolic objects connected with domestic management. No one can quite agree whether the key ritual here is old family tradition or something the groom's grandmother invented because she enjoys ceremonies. Judging by her expression, either possibility seems equally likely. Then comes the threshold. The manor doorway rises before you beneath the timber gallery. Fresh rushes have been scattered just inside. Rosemary and bay lie among them, and a small iron object, perhaps a horseshoe fragment, perhaps merely a bent fitting, has been tucked near the base of the post. Iron is often considered protective. Thresholds themselves attract superstition because they are boundaries neither fully outside nor fully inside, places where one state becomes another. A bride crossing into a new household therefore attracts an impressive amount of advice. She must enter with the correct foot. She must not stumble. She must not pause halfway. She must certainly not turn around. One aunt gives all 4 instructions at once. The bride looks down at the muddy sill with understandable concentration. The groom offers his hand. She steps across. Nothing terrible happens. Several elderly women appear almost disappointed by the lack of supernatural drama. Behind her, someone tosses another pinch of grain. Someone else raises a cup. The dog attempts to enter at the same moment and is gently pushed aside by a servant carrying a basket of bread. The animal waits 3 seconds before trying another door. You cross the threshold after them. Warmth reaches you first. Then the scents of wood smoke, beeswax, herbs, roasting meat, damp cloaks, and fresh-cut rushes. Behind you, the winter yard remains grey and cold. Ahead, beyond another heavy oak door, hundreds of candles are being lit for the wedding feast. The bride still holds one iron key in her palm. A crumb of bread remains caught near the edge of her cloak. And as the door swings slowly inward, the noise of the waiting household begins to rise. You pass through the heavy oak door and into the great hall just as another servant touches flame to a row of beeswax candles along the wall. For a moment your eyes struggle to adjust. The room is larger than it seemed from outside, long and high-roofed, with soot-black rafters disappearing into shadow above you, and narrow windows admitting only a grey winter light. Fire burns in a broad central hearth, its smoke drifting upward toward the roof while smaller braziers glow near the walls. Everywhere there is movement, but none of it feels hurried. Servants carry jugs, musicians tune strings, Guests unfasten wet cloaks. Someone drags a bench half a foot to the left, then another servant immediately drags it back. The floor beneath your boots is covered with fresh rushes. They crunch softly as you walk. Rosemary, mint, and sweet herbs have been mixed through them, though after several dozen muddy guests cross the hall, the perfume begins competing with damp wool, roasting fat, smoke, leather, and humanity. Rushes make a cold floor more bearable and catch the spills certain to come later. Whether they remain truly fresh beneath a large feast is another question entirely. Some swear that a well-kept noble hall has its rushes changed frequently. Others claim old layers can linger rather longer than anyone wishes to discuss before eating. No one can quite agree, and you decide that tonight is an excellent night not to investigate by hand. Along the walls hang woven cloths and painted panels meant to soften the stone and keep away some of the draughts. They do not keep away all of them. A thin current of cold air slips beneath the door and wanders around your ankles with remarkable persistence. Near the dais, however, the better guests sit close to a raised hearth and beneath richer hangings. Rank has many privileges. One of them is apparently being slightly less frozen. The bride and groom are led toward the upper end of the hall. A long table stands upon the raised platform there, covered with a white cloth. Behind it hang textiles in deep red and faded blue, patterned with leaves, heraldic beasts, and flowers. Several tall beeswax candles burn nearby. Beeswax costs more than ordinary tallow and burns more cleanly, so its presence at the highest table is both practical and conspicuous. Below the dais stretch other tables arranged on trestles. Wooden boards rest across supports that can later be dismantled, giving the hall flexibility once the feast ends. Benches run along the sides. There are few chairs. A carved chair at the high table belongs to someone important enough that nobody needs to ask who. You glance toward it. Then you glance at the bench nearest you. Your back already understands medieval hierarchy. Seating's not casual. Guests do not simply wander in, discover a pleasant corner, and decide they enjoy the view. Household officers and servants know roughly where people belong according to family, status, office, wealth, age, and proximity to the couple. A minor knight may sit closer to the high table than a prosperous merchant. A respected cleric may receive an honoured place. Servants eat elsewhere or later depending on their role. Even though many have spent all morning preparing the food everyone else is about to enjoy. The manor clerk from the church stands near one table with the expression of a man attempting to solve a difficult account. He points to a bench. A guest objects. He points again. The guest sits. Ink may not be required for seating arrangements, but the clerk has somehow brought authority in his stains. You're directed toward a middle table not far from a pillar, close enough to observe the bride and groom, but distant enough that nobody mistakes you for someone whose grandfather owned 3 counties. The shaggy dog slips into the hall before anyone can stop him. He crawls beneath your bench. At this point, resistance seems pointless. Trenchers are already being placed along the tables. Some are thick slices of coarse bread, slightly stale so they hold their shape beneath sauces and meat juices. Elsewhere, wooden or pewter dishes appear according to household wealth and occasion. 2 people may share certain dishes, cups, or serving vessels. Personal tableware is less abundant than your future instincts might prefer. A spoon is useful. A knife may be brought by the diner. A fork, depending on place and period, is far less likely to rescue you. Your fingers are about to become respected participants in dinner. At the far end of the hall, the musicians begin a quieter tune. A harp joins the fiddle you heard on the road, followed by a small pipe and hand drum. Their music floats above the low conversation without demanding attention. Musicians may play from a gallery, from one side of the hall, or simply wherever there is room between servants, benches, dogs, chests, and guests. Tonight they occupy a space near the screen's passage. One fiddler is the same man who played through the muddy procession. His boots are still dirty. His expression suggests that artistic dignity has limits when one has spent the morning avoiding puddles. The bride reaches the high table. Before sitting, she pauses while an older servant adjusts the cloth behind her chair. The groom waits beside her. Their families gather nearby, everyone suddenly alert to who is seated where. Placement matters because feasts display social order almost as clearly as banners. Those nearest the couple are visible. Those farther away notice. A seat can flatter. A seat can insult. Some swear that old quarrels have been renewed over less than a few feet of trestleboard. Even now, it is hard to tell whether a particular elderly gentleman near the end of the dais is offended by his position or simply suffering from a draught. His face supports both theories equally well. On the tables appear small bowls of salt. Salt itself carries meaning beyond flavour. It is valuable, necessary, and associated with preservation, purity, and hospitality. In some halls, one's place relative to an important salt vessel may even reflect social standing, though customs differ widely enough that no single rule fits every feast. Still, people notice the salt. People notice everything. You watch servants bring linen napkins, jugs, wooden cups, and additional candles. One man uses iron fire tongs to shift a glowing coal inside a brazier. Another trims candle wicks with careful fingers. A young servant walks the length of the hall checking that no rushes lie too close to open flame, proving that even in a world fond of symbolic rituals, someone still has to think about not burning down the wedding. The noise slowly settles into a steady hum. Wet cloaks have been removed. Hands reach toward the hearth and then withdraw. The musicians change melody. Beyond the screens, kitchen doors open and close, each brief glimpse revealing orange firelight, hanging pots, steaming cauldrons, and figures moving through smoke. You smell onions, then pepper, then roasted meat. The groom leans toward the bride and says something too quiet for you to hear. She smiles for the first time since entering the hall, small and almost relieved. Above them, candle flames tremble beneath the black rafters. Around them, rank, ritual, hunger, and expectation arrange themselves carefully upon wooden benches. And somewhere behind the kitchen screen, the first dishes are being lifted toward the hall. The kitchen doors swing open at last, and the hall changes at once. Conversation softens, backs straighten, and even the shaggy dog beneath your bench lifts his head with the solemn attention of a monk hearing the first bell of matins. The first servants emerge through the screen's passage in a careful line, carrying steaming bowls, platters, and baskets, while the smell of the feast finally reaches the tables in full force. Onion, pepper, dripping fat, warm bread, herbs, smoke, and stock all fold together in the air so richly that for a moment the cold draught at your ankles becomes entirely forgivable. Entirely forgivable is, of course, not the same as pleasant. Your toes remain unconvinced. The first course begins not with dramatic splendour but with comfort. Large bowls of pottage are set down along the tables, thick and fragrant, made from peas, onions, grain, leeks, and whatever good additions the household can afford. At humbler tables, pottage may be the meal itself, day after day, but on a feast day it becomes fuller, richer, and more generous. bits of salted meat have been worked into some bowls. Others are thickened with barley until the spoon stands nearly upright. Steam rises from the surface in little clouds, and the warmth of it drifting over your face feels almost medicinal. A servant ladles portions onto trenchers before you. The bread beneath begins slowly to absorb the juices. That is its task. A trencher, especially one cut from coarse, stale bread, serves as plate and sponge together. By the end of the meal it may be eaten, given away, or passed to poorer folk, depending on household custom and how much punishment it has suffered under sauce. Medieval dining has a practical streak. It assumes bread should perform several jobs if possible. Near the high table, a second wave of dishes arrives. Platters of roasted fowl gleam in candlelight, skins browned and brushed with fat. A dish of smoked fish appears too, perhaps eel or herring, its scent sharp and savoury. Though feast days celebrate abundance, medieval habits around food are shaped by fasting days, seasons, and what can actually be stored through the year. Salted, smoked, dried, and pickled foods are not signs of deprivation alone. They are proofs that a household has planned ahead well enough to survive winter and still entertain a room full of hungry relatives. You tear a piece from the edge of your trencher and dip it into the pottage. It is hearty, peppered lightly, and hot enough to persuade your fingers back into usefulness. At the high table, a pie is brought in. Now heads turn. This is no humble crust with a practical filling. The pastry is shaped and decorated, its browned lid cut with little vents and flourished edges. Medieval pies can be containers, preserves, or performances. Their crusts are not always meant to be tender in the modern sense. Some are sturdy enough to support heavy fillings or carry food from kitchen to table. Yet for a wedding, appearance matters. A pie can proclaim wealth as effectively as a banner. When the lid is lifted, scented steam rolls out venison, perhaps, or capon with herbs and dried fruits, the exact contents briefly concealed until carving begins. Some swear that a wedding pie should contain several ingredients mingled together, because mixture symbolizes the joining of two households. Others insist particular birds bring particular luck. A goose may speak of plenty, a capon of status, and a dove of peace. No one can quite agree whether these meanings are ancient truths or the inspired inventions of cooks trying to make poultry sound mystical. Either way, it works. People stare at the pie as if it contains a prophecy. A platter of roast pork follows, scored and browned, served with a sharp mustard or green herb sauce. Beside it come little dishes of verjuice-based sauces, tart and bright, made from sour grapes or crab apples. Medieval food does not fear contrast. Sweet, sour, salty, and spiced flavors mingle freely. Cinnamon may appear in meat dishes. Dried fruits nestle beside savory fillings. Almond-based sauces thicken expensive preparations with the sort of confidence only a kitchen used to impressing people can manage. The servants move quickly now. Coarse bread is replenished. Bowls are shifted. Knives flash in candlelight. At your table, a man beside you explains with great seriousness that one must never begin before those higher in rank have been served. He says this while already chewing, proving that instruction and obedience are often only distant cousins. Another dish arrives, smoked fish laid over herbs, with onions softened in broth. Fish on a wedding table may seem plain beside roast meats, yet its presence can carry its own quiet dignity. It reminds everyone that feasting does not erase the rhythms of the church year, the habits of fasting, or the practical reach of local trade. Rivers, coasts, ponds, and market routes all leave their mark on a menu. On the dais, The bride is served a specially arranged portion on a cleaner, finer trencher than most. A little dish of white sauce sits near her hand. The groom receives carved slices placed carefully before him. Presentation matters here. You can almost see the household's reputation being plated alongside the food. Then comes a dish spoken of in whispers before it even arrives: eggs in sauce, richly seasoned, perhaps tinted yellow with saffron. Eggs carry obvious associations with fertility and new life, and for that reason they sometimes appear in wedding meals with more meaning than their simplicity suggests. A plump, ordinary egg can become positively ceremonial once enough elderly relatives gaze at it hopefully. A woman across from you nudges her daughter and murmurs something about future blessings. The daughter turns the colour of beets. The dog beneath the bench sighs, perhaps exhausted by symbolic poultry, symbolic eggs, and the ongoing refusal of anyone to drop him a proper portion. You finally manage that kindness with a scrap of soaked bread and a tiny shred of meat. He accepts it with grave gratitude. Somewhere farther down the hall, laughter rises as a guest mistakes a very strong mustard for a mild sauce, and learns humility in one heroic bite. Another servant arrives with a platter of little baked pastries filled with minced meat, onions, and herbs. Their edges are crimped neatly. At a wedding feast, even small dishes are asked to do more than nourish. They must delight, reassure, honour, and occasionally hint that this family owns enough spice to make the neighbours envious for years. Even now, it is hard to tell where appetite ends and symbolism begins. A loaf may be bread, blessing, and status all at once. A pie may be supper, spectacle, and family politics enclosed in pastry. And as trenchers soak, knives scrape, sauces gleam, and the first true hunger of the day gives way to warmth, you realize that the feast is telling its story through every dish set before you. One spoonful, one carving, one fragrant course at a time. The platters continue to move along the tables, but now the servants begin paying almost as much attention to cups as to food. Wooden jugs appear from behind the screens, followed by squat earthenware vessels and one polished metal ewer reserved for the high table. The air is already thick with the scents of roast meat, onion, smoke, and warm bread. And now another fragrance joins them: spiced wine, sweetened and dark, carrying cinnamon, cloves, and something sharper that reaches your nose before the cup ever reaches your hand. The shaggy dog beneath your bench notices none of this. He is still considering the possibility that roast pork may fall from heaven. You, meanwhile, are handed a wooden cup. It is not entirely yours. A man beside you takes it first, drinks, wipes the rim with his thumb in a gesture that accomplishes very little, and passes it across. Sharing cups is common enough where vessels are limited, especially at large gatherings. The wealthy possess more silver, pewter, glass, and imported wares. But even in prosperous households, not every guest necessarily receives a private collection of tableware. You accept the cup. The ale is cloudy, cool rather than cold, and mildly sour beneath the grain. It is comforting in the way a hearth is comforting, imperfect, smoky, familiar. Ale belongs naturally to daily life. It may be safer and more pleasant than questionable water in some places, though medieval people certainly drink water too when clean sources are available. Brewing is household work as well as specialized craft, and women are often deeply involved in making and selling ale. At markets, quality can even become a matter of regulation, tolls, measures, and local argument. A wedding, naturally, requires more. More barrels, more cups, more people discovering that they are suddenly experts in brewing. At the high table, the bride receives wine. It is poured carefully into a finer vessel, then passed to the groom. They drink from the same cup. The gesture is simple enough, but many people notice. Shared drink suits a wedding because the symbolism requires almost no explanation. Two people drink from one vessel. What was separate becomes shared. Thirst, prosperity, hospitality, and household resources are all folded into a single small act. Some swear that whichever spouse drinks more deeply from the wedding cup will hold greater authority in the household. The bride takes a modest sip. The groom takes an equally modest one. Several older relatives lean forward in disappointment. Apparently, destiny's produced a draw. Elsewhere, similar beliefs become more elaborate. A cup emptied completely may promise abundance. Leaving too much may hint at waste. Spilling wine can be lucky in one district and unfortunate in another. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though everyone becomes remarkably certain after the spill has already happened. A young cousin demonstrates this when his elbow catches a cup. A little ale splashes across the table. He freezes. His mother says it means prosperity. His uncle says it means careless elbows. Both explanations appear valid. A servant throws fresh rushes over the wet patch beneath the bench, and the feast continues. Soon the first formal toast begins. A senior relative stands near the dais, cup lifted. Conversation diminishes. The musicians lower their instruments. Even the servants slow for a moment as words of blessing are offered to the newly married pair health. Heirs, fertile fields, peaceful years, sound livestock, full granaries, and enough wisdom to survive one another. The list of hopes is practical. Medieval marriage lives close to material reality. A healthy household depends on harvests, animals, labour, weather, inheritance, and peace. A romantic blessing is welcome, but a barn that does not burn and a cow that survives winter may be equally persuasive evidence of divine favour. Cups rise. You raise yours. Ways hail and similar drinking wishes have long histories in parts of medieval Europe, though exactly how such words are used changes by region and period. Drinking to health has the satisfying advantage of being both ceremonial and immediately testable. Everyone drinks. The dog receives nothing. He looks betrayed by civilization. Another servant brings a warmed, spiced drink nearer your table. The wine has been heated with spices and perhaps a little honey, then strained. Such preparations can be expensive because spices travel astonishing distances before reaching a manor storehouse. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and other aromatics pass through merchants, ports, toll stations, warehouses, markets, and many hands before appearing beside a medieval hearth. That journey matters. When a host serves heavily spiced wine, guests taste wealth with every sip. You try it. It is warm, sweet, strong, and fragrant enough to make you briefly forget the draught at your feet. Briefly. Medieval architecture always remembers. Across from you sits the suspicious-looking monk you noticed earlier near the church, though perhaps suspicious is unfair. His hood simply casts his face in shadow, and he guards his cup with uncommon seriousness. A pilgrim badge glints on the cloak of the man beside him. The monk murmurs that certain herbs placed in drink can protect against stomach trouble after a heavy meal. Another guest recommends mint. Someone suggests sage. A third mentions a charm. No one can quite agree whether the best protection against overindulgence is rosemary, prayer, or simply stopping before the fourth cup. and the final option attracts the least enthusiasm. Medieval remedies often blur the boundaries between food, medicine, and belief. Wine may carry herbs. Ale may be recommended for weakness. Spices can be praised for warming the body or aiding digestion, according to contemporary ideas about balance and humours. After a feast heavy with meat and pastry, anything described as digestive enjoys a forgiving audience. More toasts follow. One is for the bride's family. Another honours the groom's kin. A third remembers absent relatives. Each cup binds the room a little more tightly, not only through drink but through attention. People stand, others answer. Names are spoken aloud. Old alliances are acknowledged. Small resentments are temporarily submerged beneath ale. Temporarily is doing important work there. At your table, the wooden cup continues its slow journey from hand to hand. You begin to recognize each person by how they drink. One takes only a careful sip. Another gulps as though competing with a drought. An elderly woman smells the wine before drinking it, and then gives a tiny approving nod. Perhaps the most intimidating review the household will receive all evening. Near the dais, the bride and groom share their cup once more. This time she drinks first. A few guests cheer. Someone pounds the table softly. The bride lowers the vessel with a restrained smile. Then the groom drinks. The musicians resume their tune. Candle flames sway in the movement of servants passing between tables. Steam still rises from dishes. The salt bowls gleam. Beneath your fingers, the edge of the trencher is softened with sauce, and beside your boot, the dog finally acquires a fallen scrap of pastry through means that are probably not legal. The hall grows warmer. Voices loosen. Cups pass more freely now, carrying ale, wine, spice, hospitality, superstition, and the quiet hope that whatever these two people share tonight will remain generous enough to last beyond the candles. And just as you begin to think the feast has revealed its finest tricks, the kitchen doors open again and the servants emerge carrying something far stranger than another cup. The servants emerge slowly enough that everyone notices before they understand what they are seeing. At first there is only a great silver-coloured platter carried between two men, both walking with the solemn caution usually reserved for relics, wounded bishops, or dishes that cost far too much to drop. Then the candlelight catches a sweep of blue and green feathers rising above the platter, and the murmur in the hall changes at once. A peacock has arrived, or more precisely, a roasted bird dressed again in its own magnificent plumage. The body has been cooked elsewhere in the heat and smoke of the kitchen, but the skin and feathers have been arranged so carefully that the creature appears almost alive, its long tail spread behind it in shimmering circles of blue, bronze, and green. A little gilding glints along the beak. Someone has tied a narrow ribbon around the neck. You're not certain whether to admire it or apologize to it. The shaggy dog beneath your bench has no such difficulty. He admires it entirely as food. The platter is carried toward the high table while the musicians strike a brighter tune. Guests lean sideways to see. Even the elderly gentleman who has spent half the feast looking offended by his seat straightens with interest. Such displays are not simply about hunger. At a wealthy medieval feast, food can become theatre. A host may send out dishes designed to astonish before anyone thinks of eating them. Birds can be presented with feathers restored after roasting. Pastries may be shaped into towers, castles, beasts, or heraldic forms. Sugarwork, where available to the very rich, can be moulded and coloured. A dish can proclaim that the household has money, skilled cooks, imported ingredients, enough servants to perform unnecessary tasks, and sufficient confidence to turn supper into a small pageant. The peacock reaches the dais. The bride laughs softly when she sees it. The groom looks as if he's been warned not to touch anything yet. Some swear that peacocks symbolize immortality because people once believed their flesh resisted decay. Others associate the bird with pride, nobility, beauty, or courtly display. No one can quite agree whether any particular wedding host chooses a peacock for mystical symbolism, or because nothing says remember this feast quite like rebuilding dinner into a bird. The latter explanation feels persuasive. A senior servant presents the platter before the couple, turning it slightly so the tail catches the candlelight. There is applause. Then, with perfect medieval practicality, the bird is carried away to be carved. Splendor must eventually surrender to knives. Before the peacock returns in more manageable portions, another spectacle appears. This time it is a pie. Not the handsome pie you saw earlier, but a structure so tall that it resembles a squat fortress built by a baker with political ambitions. Its crust rises in tiers, decorated with leaves, little shields, and twisted strips of pastry. At the top stands a small banner bearing the joined colours of the two families. The pie is set down in the middle of the hall. Everyone waits. A servant produces a knife. Several guests lean forward. The crust is cut. For one breath nothing happens. Then a small bird flutters out. A woman gasps. Someone laughs. A second bird escapes through the opening and flies directly toward the rafters, where it lands on a blackened beam and begins reconsidering every decision that has brought it to this moment. The hall erupts in delighted noise. You duck instinctively when another bird flaps past your head. The dog shoots from beneath the bench. 3 servants immediately pursue him. This, apparently Sirm, was not included in the ceremonial plan. Live birds released from pies or enclosed dishes belong more to the world of elaborate entertainment than ordinary eating, and such spectacles are associated with elite feasts where surprise itself becomes part of hospitality. The birds are not the filling, despite what future jokes may imply. They're hidden in a prepared container or introduced into a hollow structure so that opening the dish creates sudden movement. It is clever. It is memorable. It is also an excellent way to discover how many people in one hall are frightened of pigeons. The bride covers her mouth to hide laughter. The groom fails completely to hide his. The bird in the rafters remains there. No one volunteers to retrieve it. Even now, it's hard to tell whether such entertainments are intended to symbolize abundance, celebration, transformation, or simply the human desire to make dinner unnecessarily complicated. The kitchen seems determined to continue. Next comes a subtlety, a crafted edible display set between courses, depending on place, period, and wealth. Subtleties may be made from sugar paste, marzipan-like mixtures, pastry, or other decorative foods. This one represents a small castle with 2 towers, fashioned from pale almond paste and pastry, its windows painted with saffron and dark spice. Tiny figures stand at the gate. One wears the bride's colours, the other wears the groom's. Between them lies a little bridge. The symbolism is about as subtle as a church bell at dawn. Still, everyone approves. Sugar is expensive enough here to remain a luxury rather than an everyday sweetness. Much of the ordinary sweetness in the hall comes from honey or dried fruit, but refined sugar can travel through long trade networks and command impressive prices. Serving it is therefore not merely pleasant, it is evidence. You can almost hear the message beneath the decoration. This household knows merchants. This household pays tolls. This household can afford to turn imported sweetness into architecture and then let people eat the walls. A servant slices the little castle. One tower collapses. A guest remarks that this is probably not an omen. Several people immediately cross themselves. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether accidentally breaking symbolic food invites misfortune. The bride's aunt announces that broken pastry means nothing at all, provided everyone eats it quickly. This proves to be a popular theological position. Small pieces are distributed. The almond mixture is dense and fragrant, sweetened with sugar and scented lightly with rosewater. You taste only a little, because the portion is small and because half the hall appears prepared to defend its share with legal argument. Another platter follows, displaying roasted small birds arranged around a central mound of rice-coloured yellow with saffron. The colour glows brilliantly beneath the candles. Saffron is precious, harvested from countless tiny flower stigmas and transported carefully. So using enough to colour food brightly announces generosity with almost indecent enthusiasm. Beside it arrives a dish shaped like a boar's head, decorated with herbs and perhaps actual meat beneath the arrangement. Rosemary forms greenery around the platter. Red berries provide contrast. An apple sits in the mouth, though whether this is customary here or merely the cook's artistic decision is impossible to know. Guests admire each creation before carving begins. That pause matters. For a few moments, if food is not merely consumed, it is inspected, interpreted, praised, remembered. The feast becomes a gallery that vanishes mouthful by mouthful. By the time the peacock returns carved, its theatrical life is over. Pieces are placed before honoured guests. The feathers remain displayed nearby, preserving the illusion even after practical eating resumes. You receive no peacock. Your rank remains painfully consistent. Instead, a servant places a warm meat pastry before you, and you decide social disappointment is easier to endure when wrapped in crust. Above, the escaped bird shifts on the rafter. Below, the dog has been recaptured and returned to his place beneath your bench, though a feather now clings mysteriously to his nose. The musicians play. The candles burn lower, and around you, castles of sugar, jewelled birds, decorated pies, and improbable dishes remind everyone that this wedding feast is not simply meant to fill the stomach. It is meant to become a story. The escaped bird remains high in the rafters while the musicians take advantage of the laughter it has caused. The fiddler launches into a quicker tune. The pipe answers, and a small hand drum begins tapping beneath both of them. What had been a meal now starts becoming something looser. Cups are still passing, trenchers still crowd the boards, and servants still move between benches carrying the remains of pies and roasted meat. But the careful order of the first courses is beginning to soften around the edges. You notice it at first in the voices. People speak louder. Relatives who spent the early meal sitting straight-backed and formal now lean across the table to tell stories. A merchant near the salt cellar laughs so hard that his hood slips backward. The elderly gentleman who objected silently to his seat has stopped looking offended and begun tapping 2 fingers in time with the drum. Even the suspicious monk smiles, only slightly. One should not ask too much of a suspicious monk. The first benches are shifted back from the central floor. Servants lift trestle boards away from one side of the hall and carry them carefully toward the screens. Rushes scrape beneath wooden feet. Cups must be rescued before anyone accidentally dances through them. The newly cleared space becomes a rough square beneath the soot-black rafters, lit unevenly by beeswax candles and the orange glow of the hearth. The bride is coaxed forward. She hesitates only a moment. The groom joins her, followed by several relatives and friends, and the musicians settle into a steady dance rhythm. Medieval dancing at a wedding can take many forms, depending on region, rank, and fashion. Some dances move in lines or circles. Others pair dancers who step, turn, bow, and advance with the degree of dignity that becomes harder to maintain after several cups of ale. Tonight, hands join loosely as a line forms across the hall. You are pulled into it before you can object. Your left hand belongs to a broad-shouldered baker. Your right is taken by an elderly widow whose grip could probably crush walnuts. The music begins. You step, then step again, then discover that everyone else has turned. You follow a heartbeat late. No catastrophe occurs. This is encouraging. The line winds around the floor, wool skirts swaying, leather shoes sliding over the rushes. The bride's veil moves softly behind her. The groom attempts a more decorative step and nearly catches his heel on a clump of rosemary. Some swear that stumbling during a wedding dance foretells trouble. The bride's aunt immediately declares that it does not count if the floor is badly swept. Once again, practical women defeat prophecy. The shaggy dog watches from beneath a bench with obvious disappointment that no dance has yet produced food. As the first dance ends, a young man near the musicians begins a teasing song about husbands who promise obedience before marriage and forget the promise before breakfast. The hall responds with laughter. Wedding songs can be affectionate, rude, moralizing, playful, or all four at once. Marriage is serious business, but the feast gives the community permission to mock it gently. Newlyweds become targets for jokes precisely because everyone understands the weight of what they have done. Another verse turns against wives who hide the household keys. The bride lifts the iron key still hanging from her girdle. The room cheers. The groom makes the expression of a man who has realized that the song has become dangerously accurate. No one can quite agree whether such teasing is meant to relieve tension, warn the couple about married life, or simply entertain guests who have eaten too much. Probably all three. Then come the riddles. A clerk near your table stands and proposes one concerning something that has teeth but cannot bite. Answers travel through the hall. A hound? A saw? An old comb? The last answer proves correct. Someone produces an actual bone comb from a pouch as though evidence has been prepared in advance. Another riddle asks what grows smaller while giving light. A candle. This one is answered quickly because dozens of examples are burning in front of everyone. The clerk looks mildly disappointed that medieval visual aids have ruined his triumph. Riddling belongs comfortably beside feast entertainment. It requires no stage, little equipment, and only enough wit to keep people arguing. Familiar riddles pass orally between households, taverns, courts, and monasteries. Some have ancient roots. Others may be invented after the third cup and wisely forgotten by morning. A group near the hearth begins a guessing game with small objects hidden beneath cups, a hazelnut, a coin, a ring, and a scrap of cloth are moved while one guest turns away. The bride's cousin chooses the cup hiding the ring. At once several women make interested noises. Some swear that finding a ring during wedding games means the finder will be the next to marry. The cousin drops the ring as though it has become hot iron. The hall laughs. She claims she prefers the hazelnut. The hazelnut has no opinion. Meanwhile, a man in a patched russet cloak takes on the temporary role of mischief maker. Whether invited for this purpose or simply naturally gifted is difficult to determine. He moves among the tables pretending to inspect everyone's manners, solemnly awarding imaginary fines for poor drinking, weak dancing, and failing to compliment the cook. He fines you for dancing one beat late. Payment is demanded in the form of a toast. You comply. This seems cheaper than medieval litigation. Licensed disorder has its place during festivals and weddings. Foolish speeches, comic reversals, mock judgments, and playful challenges allow people to bend ordinary hierarchy without quite breaking it. A servant may tease a guest. A younger cousin may mock an elder. For a little while, strict social rules loosen beneath the protection of celebration. Not entirely, of course. The manor steward still watches the room. One look from him is enough to prevent a drunken guest from climbing onto the high table. Authority sleeps lightly. The musicians start another dance. This one moves more slowly, allowing couples to pace in measured steps. The bride and groom cross the floor again, calmer now, no longer looking as though every pair of eyes in the room is examining them. You stand nearer the hearth and rest. Heat presses against your face while your back remains cool. A servant uses iron tongs to settle a collapsing log. Sparks rise toward the black rafters. The escaped bird flutters once above and then becomes still again. The dog finally leaves his hiding place. He trots through the edge of the dancers. Someone nearly trips. A cup tilts but does not spill. The fiddler never stops playing. By now the feast has surrendered its perfect arrangement. Rushes lie crushed beneath countless shoes. One candle is burned halfway down. Plates have shifted. A ribbon hangs from a bench. Laughter travels in waves from one side of the hall to the other. Yet beneath all the teasing and games, the celebration is doing something serious. It is allowing two families to become familiar. People dance with strangers. They trade jokes with new relatives. They remember names. They forgive small insults, or at least postpone them. The bride looks round the hall and sees not merely guests, but the complicated household world she's entered. The groom sees the same, and as the drum softens, the dance is slow, and the last riddle dissolves into laughter. Another quieter business begins near the high table. Pouches are brought forward. Folded cloth appears, and one by one, the gifts of marriage begin to change hands. The laughter from the dancing floor gradually softens as people notice what is happening near the dais. The musicians keep playing, but more quietly now, their tune settling into something gentle enough to sit beneath conversation. Servants clear space at one end of the high table. A chest is brought forward, then another. A folded length of wool cloth appears over someone's arm, followed by a small leather purse, a bundle tied with cord, and a wooden box reinforced with narrow iron bands. The feast has entered its practical hour. Marriage may arrive wrapped in blessings, rosemary, music, and spiced wine, but sooner or later someone brings out the property. You move closer with the other guests. The bride and groom remain seated together while relatives from both households gather before them. The manor clerk reappears, looking deeply pleased to have returned to a part of the wedding that can be counted. His ink-stained fingers hold a parchment sheet. A little horn of ink sits beside him, and a quill rests across the top like a tiny spear. The first gift is cloth. Several yards of good wool are unfolded across the table, dyed a deep russet that catches red beneath the candles. Cloth is valuable, useful, transportable, and always needed. It can become a gown, cloak, bedding, hangings, or be stored against future necessity. A household with strong chests full of linen and wool owns a kind of quiet security. The bride touches the fabric. Her mother smiles. The groom's sister immediately begins estimating how many garments might be cut from it. No one can quite agree whether that is helpful. Next comes linen. Sheets, napkins, towels, shifts, and household cloth may form part of a bride's goods, prepared over years in some families. Spinning, weaving, bleaching, sewing, and storing textiles require immense labour, and the neat folded stacks placed before the bride represent many evenings of work that will never appear in a heroic song. You notice small stitched marks in one corner of a sheet. They identify the household. A woman beside you says such marks prevent linen from wandering. Given the number of servants, guests, laundresses, chests, and drying lines involved in a manor, wandering linen is evidently considered a genuine threat. Then an uncle places a small pewter dish upon the table. Another relative adds 2 wooden bowls. A cousin offers a brass pin. A widow brings a wool blanket heavy enough to survive an argument with January. None of these gifts is spectacular, yet each one matters. The new household needs bowls more often than jewels. It needs blankets more often than poetry. A marriage feast may look extravagant for one day, but marriage itself begins the following morning with keys, bread, bedding, storage, repairs, servants, animals, and accounts. The clerk makes notes. His quill scratches steadily. Property arrangements are not always simple. Dowries, dower rights, marriage portions, gifts, land, rents, household goods, and promises vary enormously by region, class, custom, and family agreement. A bride's family may provide money, land, livestock, textiles, or goods. A groom may grant property or future income intended to support his wife, especially if she survives him. Even now, it is hard to tell whether every person in the room fully understands the arrangement. The clerk certainly wants everyone to believe he does. A leather purse is opened next. Silver coins spill onto a cloth. They are counted carefully. Not quickly. Each coin passes through fingers and is laid in a little row. The sound is delicate, almost musical, tiny taps of metal against wood beneath the larger murmur of the hall. One coin is rejected because its edge has been clipped. An elderly man argues that it is still good silver. The clerk disagrees. For a moment, the wedding seems in danger of being remembered primarily as an accounting dispute over half a coin. The bride's aunt ends the matter by telling them both to stop. This appears to be one of the more powerful institutions in medieval law. The groom receives gifts too. A relative presents him with a serviceable knife in a leather sheath. Another gives a small iron tool for the household. A merchant cousin promises delivery of a cask after the roads improve. Somebody offers a young ewe. The ewe is not brought into the hall. Everyone is grateful. Livestock can represent genuine wealth. Sheep provide wool, milk in some regions, manure for fields, and future animals. A cow may be an enormous contribution. Chickens, geese, pigs, and even bees can enter the practical economy of marriage. Some swear that giving a beehive to newlyweds encourages harmony because bees live in ordered communities. Others might point out that bees also sting people who disturb them. Symbolism rarely includes the entire truth. A small wooden chest comes forward next. The bride recognizes it. Her father has had it made for her. Iron straps reinforce the lid, and the lock is new. Inside lie several personal objects, a rosary, 2 small spoons, folded linen, a bone comb, sewing needles tucked into cloth, a little pouch of herbs, and several coins wrapped separately. The iron key given to her earlier fits the lock. She tries it. The mechanism turns with a heavy click. For the first time all evening, the object in her hand feels less ceremonial and more real. This chest is hers to use, guard, fill, and perhaps one day pass onward. Some women keep treasured items under lock because household possessions have a way of becoming communal unless firmly defended. Fine cloth, documents, money, Jewelry, medicines, spices, and even sewing equipment can be stored in locked chests. A strong lock is not distrust. It is optimism with iron fittings. Then come promises that cannot be carried into the hall. A strip of land, a yearly rent, rights to grain from a particular field, the use of a pasture, a payment due at a saint's feast. These are spoken aloud, witnessed, and sometimes written down. Marriage stretches through the local landscape in invisible lines. A field beyond the river may now support this household. A tenant's rent may help purchase salt. A few hens from one manor may become winter broth in another. The feast suddenly feels connected to roads, mills, barns, tolls, and manor courts far beyond the candles. Public gift-giving matters partly because people remember what they have seen. Witnesses make promises harder to forget conveniently. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether one distant relative actually promised 3 sheep or 2. By the time the argument returns years later, everyone will probably remember 5. At last, the gifts are gathered carefully. Cloth is folded. Coins return to purses. The bride's chest is locked. The groom's knife is placed at his belt. The clerk dries his ink with the satisfaction of a man whose evening has finally become sensible. Around you, cups begin moving again. The musicians lift their tune. The feast relaxes once more into warmth and noise. Yet something has changed. The marriage is no longer only words spoken at a church door or hands joined beneath a blessing. It now has wool, silver, bowls, keys, land, debts, promises, and a chest with a lock. It has weight. And as servants begin carrying away the gifts, a different object appears from the kitchen, a large round loaf, sweetened and carefully baked, surrounded by smaller cakes and eager relatives who seem determined that not a single crumb will go to waste. The large round loaf reaches the centre of the hall on a broad wooden board, and almost immediately the conversation nearest it begins to change. People who were only moments ago discussing land, sheep, rents, and clipped silver now lean forward with the alert curiosity reserved for anything sweet, symbolic, or likely to be divided unfairly. The loaf is darker than the fine white bread served to the highest guests, but its crust has been brushed until it shines, and dried fruit has been pressed into the top in little patterns. Around it sit several smaller cakes, flatter and rougher, some sweetened with honey, others enriched with eggs, butter, or spices according to what the household can afford. The bride's aunt appears beside the board. Naturally. By now you suspect no wedding custom within 50 miles is allowed to proceed without her approval. She lifts one of the smaller cakes and examines it as though checking a legal document. Then she gestures for the bride and groom to come closer. Wedding cakes in the medieval world are not the towering iced monuments imagined by later centuries. Customs vary wildly. In one place, guests may bring small cakes or loaves. In another, bread may be broken over the bride. Elsewhere, sweetened breads, wafers, buns, or pies become part of the celebration. Some customs survive only in later descriptions, and no one can quite agree whether every story told about old wedding cakes belongs to actual medieval practice or to traditions that grew afterward and borrowed an ancient-looking cloak. Here, however, the bread is real enough. The aunt breaks off a piece. She hands half to the bride, half to the groom. They eat together. The gesture echoes the coarse loaf they shared after leaving the church, but this bread is richer, sweeter, and surrounded by far more witnesses. Honey clings faintly to the crumb. A little dried fruit appears near the centre. The bride chews slowly while several older women watch with such concentration that one might think the future of the harvest depends upon her swallowing correctly. Then comes the strange part. The aunt takes a second small cake. She raises it above the bride's head. The bride closes her eyes. Crumbs rain gently over her veil. A few guests laugh. The groom receives some too, though mostly because he is standing too close. Breaking or crumbling bread over a bride appears in various older European wedding traditions and is often connected, at least in later interpretation, with fertility, abundance, prosperity, or the sharing of good fortune. Whether every guest here could explain the symbolism is doubtful. Most traditions survive because people know what to do long after they have stopped knowing why. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the crumbs are meant to bless the bride, confuse bad spirits, promise children, or simply ensure that the family laundress has work tomorrow. The shaggy dog settles the theological question by eating whatever reaches the floor. He moves with astonishing efficiency. The fresh rushes beneath the bride's feet begin collecting crumbs among rosemary leaves and scraps of straw. Several unmarried guests step closer. This is when you notice that the crumbs are not being treated as rubbish. A young woman bends quickly and picks one from the bride's shoulder before it falls. She wraps it in the corner of a handkerchief. Another gathers a little piece from the edge of the board. Some swear that carrying away a crumb from wedding bread can bring good luck in love. Others tuck pieces beneath pillows in hopes of dreaming about a future spouse. In some traditions, a bit of wedding food may be saved as a charm, shared with someone absent, or carried home as proof that the bearer has taken part in the celebration. The bride's cousin, the same woman who recoiled from the ring during the guessing game, now reaches discreetly toward the board. You notice. She notices that you notice. She takes the crumb anyway. Apparently the hazelnut has lost its charm. At the far end of the hall, a servant begins dividing the larger loaf into manageable portions. A long knife presses through the crust. Pieces are passed first toward the high table, then gradually outward. The wealthiest guests receive finer portions, but enough is cut that many others taste it too. You receive a small wedge. It is dense rather than delicate, pleasantly sweet, scented with spice, and slightly smoky from the oven. You can taste honey and perhaps a little cinnamon. The crumb sticks faintly to your fingers. Beside you, an elderly woman refuses to eat her entire piece. She wraps the remainder carefully in linen. For later, she says. Later may mean tomorrow. It may mean next winter. It may mean beneath a pillow tonight. You decide that medieval kitchens are not the only places where food acquires mysterious secondary careers. The smaller cakes begin circulating next. One is made with ground almonds and honey. Another contains currants. A third is little more than enriched bread. But the guests praise it anyway because weddings are not ideal occasions for criticizing someone's baking within hearing distance of their family. A man near the hearth claims that if an unmarried guest sleeps with wedding cake beneath the pillow, the face of a future spouse may appear in a dream. A woman beside him asks what happens if the dream shows the cook. He says that depends on the cook. The monk nearly smiles again. Near the dais, several children's portions are quietly sent away to households outside the main hall, along with scraps of bread and softened trenchers intended for poorer neighbours. Feast leftovers do not always vanish into waste. Good edible food may be redistributed. Servants may eat after higher status guests, and charitable giving can form part of a household's public reputation. The bride watches one basket leave through the screen's passage. Inside are crusts, pieces of trencher, scraps of meat, and several small wedges of sweet bread. Generosity carries meaning on a wedding day. A feast is judged not only by what honoured guests eat, but by how widely abundance is seen to flow. Another cake is lifted. This one is smaller and round, marked with a simple cross before baking. The priest who remained for part of the meal receives a piece first. Then the bride's mother takes another and breaks it between her fingers, giving fragments to several close kin. Some swear that blessed bread keeps household quarrels away. Others say crumbs placed in a chest protect stored linen. One elderly servant insists a crumb near grain discourages mice. That sounds optimistic enough to qualify as faith. Even now, it is hard to tell whether practical habits gradually become superstition, or superstition quietly invents practical habits to justify itself. You finish your own portion. The sweetness is modest, but after hours of salty meat, sharp mustard, spiced sauces, and ale, it feels soothing. Around you, guests begin hiding crumbs in purses, sleeves, or cloth wraps, and little leather pouches. One woman folds hers beside a pilgrim badge. Another slips a fragment into the tiny pocket of a girdle pouch next to a wooden charm. The bride looks down at herself. Crumbs cling to the edge of her veil. Her cousin picks one away. This time, instead of keeping it, she gives it to the bride. The bride laughs softly and eats it. No prophecy is consulted. No omen is interpreted. For a brief moment, bread is simply bread. Then a servant enters carrying fresh torches. The musicians lower their tune. Several older relatives exchange knowing looks. The candles have burned noticeably shorter now, and beyond the narrow windows the night has deepened into black winter stillness. The feast is preparing to move again, not toward another table, not toward another course, but slowly, ceremonially, and with far too many witnesses toward the bridal chamber. The first torch is lifted near the screen's passage, and its flame bends sharply as a draught slips through the hall. A second is lit from it, then a third, until several bright points of fire hover above the crowd. The sudden torchlight makes the familiar room look different. Shadows deepen beneath the soot-black rafters. Faces glow warm and strange, and the crushed rushes underfoot seem almost golden where rosemary leaves catch the light. The musicians begin a slow tune. Not a dance this time. Something gentler. The bride stands beside the high table while two women adjust her veil for what must be the 20th time today. A crumb of wedding bread still clings stubbornly near one fold, and her cousin brushes it away before slipping the tiny piece into her own pouch. Apparently no amount of public embarrassment has cured her interest in marital luck. The groom rises too. Around them, guests begin forming an uneven procession. This movement toward the bridal chamber is not entirely private. In some medieval wedding traditions, relatives and companions accompany the newlyweds toward the bed, sometimes with blessings, joking, songs, or symbolic rituals. The exact customs vary widely by region, period, and social class, and no one can quite agree whether every old story about public bedding ceremonies describes normal practice or only the more memorable occasions. Here, however, everyone seems determined to participate. The bride looks as though she would prefer perhaps half as many witnesses. You follow several steps behind as the company leaves the hall. The shaggy dog tries to come too. A servant blocks him with one foot. The dog sits down, offended by the first meaningful boundary anyone has enforced all evening. The procession enters a narrow stone passage lit by torches set into iron brackets. The warmth of the great hall disappears almost immediately. Cold seeps from the walls, carrying the smell of damp mortar, old wood, and extinguished candles. Your boots sound hollow against the floor. Ahead, someone carries a beeswax candle sheltered inside a horn lantern. Another guest holds a small wooden cross. An older woman has brought a bowl containing rosemary, rue, and what appears to be salt. Salt again. It has followed the wedding from table to chamber, useful as seasoning, preservation symbol, and apparently supernatural security. Some swear that a little salt placed near a marriage bed guards against envy or harmful influences. Others prefer iron. A small iron knife has already been placed discreetly beneath the bedchamber threshold. Whether this protects the couple from spirits or simply ensures someone steps very carefully tomorrow morning is difficult to say. You climb a spiral stair. The torches throw moving shadows across the central pillar. Wool skirts whisper against stone. Someone farther behind laughs at a joke you cannot hear. The musicians remain below, their melody rising faintly through the stairwell until it becomes little more than a vibration in the walls. At the upper landing, an oak door stands open. Warm light spills through it. The chamber beyond is smaller than the hall, but far more comfortable. Woven hangings cover much of the stone. A charcoal brazier glows near one wall, and several beeswax candles burn on a chest. Fresh rushes have been laid across the floor with lavender and rosemary. Most important of all, the bed dominates the room. It is a substantial wooden structure raised from the floor, with curtains hanging around it and a canopy overhead. The mattress may be stuffed with wool, feathers, or softer materials depending on the household's wealth. Beneath it lies another layer of support, and over everything have been arranged linen sheets, wool blankets, and a fur coverlet heavy enough to make winter seem temporarily negotiable. The bed is expensive. A good bed can represent a significant portion of household wealth. Its curtains provide warmth and privacy, while its textiles require enormous labor to spin, weave, sew, wash, dry, mend, and guard from damp. Tonight those linens have been inspected with almost religious seriousness. An elderly household woman runs one palm over the top sheet. She finds a wrinkle. She corrects it. Civilization is restored. At the bedpost hangs a small devotional object, perhaps a cross or saint's medal, near the head of the bed. Someone has tucked dried herbs into a little linen bag. Lavender helps scent the room. Rosemary carries its familiar association with memory and blessing. Other herbs may be chosen because people believe they promote calm sleep, fertility, health, or protection. A sprig of rue lies on the chest. A little bowl of holy water stands nearby. No one can quite agree whether so many protections indicate confidence or the complete absence of it. The priest, who is followed only as far as the doorway, offers a blessing. The bride and groom bow their heads. For a moment, the teasing stops. The room becomes quiet enough that you hear the brazier crack softly. A blessing over the marriage bed can ask for peace, fidelity, children, health, and divine protection. The bed is not merely furniture. It is where lineage may continue, where illness will be endured, where winter nights will be passed beneath wool blankets, where private conversations will unfold long after tonight's public celebration has been forgotten. The priest finishes. The silence lasts perhaps 3 heartbeats. Then the jokes return. A cousin asks the groom whether he knows which side of the bed belongs to him. An aunt answers before he can. Another guest warns the bride to keep control of the blankets from the first night, because yielding ground early creates dangerous precedent. The groom says something about fairness. 3 married men nearby laugh so quietly that it sounds almost like prayer. These jokes serve a purpose beyond amusement. They soften embarrassment. They transform a moment of intense public attention into something familiar and communal. Marriage carries enormous expectations, and humour gives everyone a way to acknowledge them without speaking too plainly. The bride's shoes are removed. Someone makes a great performance of checking them for hidden knots or strange objects. Knots can carry powerful associations in folk belief. A tied knot may symbolize binding, protection, or, in less welcome interpretations, interference with fertility or marital harmony. Some swear that malicious people can tie a marriage through charms. Others dismiss this completely while still checking the shoes. A narrow ribbon is untied from the bride's clothing. Her veil is carefully removed. Her hair, which has been pinned beneath layers of cloth since morning, is loosened little by little. Pins are collected into a bowl so none disappear into bedding. This practical detail receives more attention than several theological ones. Anyone who has ever found a forgotten pin beneath a blanket understands why. The groom removes his outer coat and belt. His knife is set aside. Heavy boots come off. The room begins slowly shedding ceremony as well as clothing, though modesty is preserved beneath linen garments and the watchful management of relatives. The bride's mother folds the veil. Her aunt checks the blankets again. Someone places the shared wedding cup on a nearby chest. Another person leaves a small piece of bread beside it. Some swear that keeping bread near the bed ensures the household will never go hungry. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that belief is mystical or simply the natural consequence of living in a world where hunger is always close enough to be remembered. At last, the companions begin withdrawing. One by one, torches disappear through the doorway. The teasing grows softer. The priest is already gone. The bride sits on the edge of the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders now, the old silver brooch removed and resting safely inside her locked chest. The groom stands beside the brazier warming his hands. The final aunt looks around the room. She checks the candle. She checks the herbs. She checks the blanket. She checks the door. Only then does she leave. The oak door closes. The iron latch falls gently into place, and you descend the stair with the others, carrying torch smoke on your cloak while the sounds of the feast rise again from below. You reach the bottom of the spiral stair and step once more into the great hall, though the room you return to is no longer quite the room you left. The feast has begun to fold inward upon itself. The highest candles have burned low, their wax gathered in pale ridges around iron holders, and the great hearth has collapsed into a bed of red embers streaked with ash. Smoke hangs beneath the soot-black rafters in a thin blue veil. Somewhere near the musician's corner, one last fiddle string is being loosened for the night. The careful order of earlier hours has vanished. Benches stand at crooked angles. One trestle board has been removed entirely. A wooden cup lies on its side beside a pillar, a dark stain of ale already disappearing into the rushes. Bits of bread, herbs, nutshells, feathers, and pastry crusts are scattered across the floor like the remains of a very small and unusually festive battlefield. The shaggy dog greets you immediately. Apparently he has forgiven civilization for excluding him from the bridal chamber. He is stretched beside the hearth now, with his nose resting on his paws, surrounded by the peaceful confidence of a creature who has spent the day stealing enough food to qualify as minor nobility. You find a place near the fire. Servants are still working. Their feast day has never really stopped being a work day. Two women carry platters toward the kitchen, separating edible leftovers from bones, spoiled scraps, and things that have fallen so thoroughly into the rushes that even medieval standards become cautious. Another servant stacks wooden bowls. A boy old enough for late-night duties carries cups toward a tub where they will be rinsed. Good scraps are not simply discarded. Pieces of meat may become tomorrow's pottage. Bread can be dried, soaked, redistributed, or given to servants and the poor. Bones may enrich stock. Fat is valuable. Even stale ale can sometimes find some unfortunate secondary purpose. Nothing in a household that has survived winter is wasted merely because the wedding guests have become sleepy. Near the screen's passage, the manor steward counts serving vessels. He lifts one cup, then another, then pauses. A spoon is missing. This produces more concern than the escaped bird did earlier. The search begins quietly. A servant checks beneath the high table. Another looks behind a chest. The steward asks whether anyone saw a pewter spoon near the salt cellar. No one has. A guest suggests the dog. The dog does not open one eye. You admire his legal strategy. Eventually the spoon is discovered beneath a folded napkin. Order returns to the kingdom. At another table, several guests have not yet surrendered to sleep. A merchant, the suspicious monk, 2 cousins, and an elderly widow sit around a final jug of ale, while voices remain low enough not to disturb those already dozing against walls. They are talking about the newlyweds. Naturally. The bride's nervous expression at the church door is discussed. The groom's near stumble during the dance is recalled. The aunt's management of the wedding bread receives particular admiration. Someone mentions the tall pie and insists 4 birds escaped from it. You distinctly remember fewer. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about anything worth repeating. By morning there will probably have been 7 birds, one of them an eagle. The widow takes a careful sip of ale and says that a wedding night should never end with every candle extinguished at once. Some swear that one light ought to remain burning somewhere in the household until dawn, a sign that warmth and continuity have not vanished with the feast. Another guest says the practice exists simply because servants still need to see. Both explanations coexist comfortably. Near the kitchen door, one small beeswax candle is indeed left burning. Its flame is steady now that fewer people are moving past. The servants begin gathering old rushes from the most heavily used areas. Not all will be removed tonight, but the worst patches are raked together with wooden tools, especially where ale, grease, and crushed food have soaked through. Fresh rushes may be spread tomorrow where needed. A handful of rosemary still gives off scent when disturbed. You catch it beneath the stronger smells of smoke, onions, damp wool, and cooling meat. Beside the hearth, a servant lays 2 wool blankets over sleeping guests who have clearly missed their chance to find proper beds. One man is already snoring with his mouth open. His boots remain on. His cloak is twisted beneath his shoulder. He looks entirely at peace. Medieval hospitality often means fitting people wherever space exists. Guest chambers, benches, pallets, lofts, floors, or corners near a fire. A large wedding can overwhelm even a wealthy household. Privacy becomes negotiable. Warmth becomes competitive. A bench suddenly begins to look like luxury furniture. You pull your cloak tighter around yourself and listen. Outside, the winter wind moves against the shutters. Somewhere in the courtyard, a horse stamps in its stall. Far beyond the manor, an abbey bell marks the night hour. The sound enters faintly through stone and timber, solemn and distant. A servant crosses herself when she hears it. Then she resumes stacking trenchers. Near the high table, the bride's mother has returned to collect the last of the wedding cloths. She folds one carefully and checks the floor around it for crumbs. Not because she wants them removed, because one fragment of the sweet wedding bread is still missing. A younger woman claims she saw a cousin carry it upstairs. Another says it was wrapped in linen. Some swear that a portion of wedding bread saved through the night can protect the household from quarrels during the first year of marriage. Others say it may be crumbled into seed grain in spring for luck. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the custom is widely practiced or simply beloved by families who dislike wasting cake. The mother eventually finds a small piece near a platter. She wraps it. No explanation is offered. At the kitchen threshold, a cook is rubbing tired hands with a mixture of warm water and herbs. His fingers are reddened from heat and work. A small pot of salve sits nearby, made from fat and soothing plants. Medieval kitchens are hard on skin knives, hot iron, smoke, boiling pots, split wood, grease, and cold water all take their share. He notices you looking and lifts both hands. They are blackened at the fingertips. The wedding may be romantic upstairs. Down here, it is mostly washing up. The musicians finally leave. The fiddler wraps his instrument in cloth before stepping into the cold yard. The pipe player follows, carrying a lantern. Their departure removes the last expectation of further dancing. Silence does not arrive all at once. It comes in layers. First the music ends. Then conversations shrink. Then fewer bowls knock together. Then the kitchen door closes. Then someone banks the hearth, drawing ash across the coals so a little heat may survive until morning. You settle against the wall near the dog. His fur is warm against your boot. The half-burned candle you noticed earlier finally gutters and goes dark, but the small household light near the kitchen remains. Above you, beyond timber beams, stone passages, and one carefully latched oak door, the newly married couple has disappeared into privacy at last. Below, everyone else is left with crumbs, smoke, gossip, sore feet, unpaid work, cooling cups, and the slow realization that even the grandest feast eventually becomes a room that must be cleaned before breakfast. Outside, frost gathers again along the courtyard stones. Inside, the embers dim, and the manor settles carefully into midnight. You wake before sunrise because the abbey bells begin sounding across the frozen fields, their slow notes entering the manor through shutters, cracks, and cold stone as though the night itself has learned to ring. For several breaths you remain where you settled beside the wall, wrapped in your cloak with your back protesting gently against medieval hospitality. The great hall is almost dark. Only a dull red glow survives beneath the ash of the hearth, and the single household candle left burning through the night has shortened to a crooked stump. Beside your boot, the shaggy dog opens one eye. He considers dawn. He rejects it. Then he goes back to sleep. Around the hall, other guests begin waking slowly. A man on the bench near the pillar sits upright with a confused expression, apparently surprised to discover that sleeping in boots has not improved them. Two servants are already moving through the room, carrying wooden buckets and lifting shutters one by one. Grey light enters. It reveals everything candlelight politely concealed. The rushes are flattened and stained. Walnut shells lie beneath benches. A ribbon from last night's dancing hangs from the corner of a trestle. There are crumbs near the hearth, dried drops of ale on a table, and one blue-green peacock feather resting beside the wall like evidence from a particularly extravagant dream. The escaped bird is gone. No one knows when. Some swear it flew through a roof opening before dawn. A servant claims he carried it outside. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, and by next winter there will probably be a song in which the creature escaped directly toward France. The kitchen wakes before everyone else. Soon you hear chopping, scraping, and the renewed crackle of fire. Yesterday's enormous feast has become this morning's practical breakfast. Leftover bread is warmed near the hearth. Pieces of meat are cut into a pot. Pottage begins thickening over the fire with onions and barley. A servant brings smoked fish from the storehouse, while another pours small ale into wooden cups. Nothing looks theatrical now. There are no pastry castles, no feathered peacocks, no live birds emerging from pies. Breakfast has no interest in impressing distant cousins. It simply wants everyone fed before the road. You stand and stretch your stiff legs. Cold reaches through the floor immediately. Someone throws another bundle of rushes near the doorway while an older servant sweeps the worst of yesterday's remains into a wicker basket. The rosemary mixed among the floor covering has faded, but when crushed beneath the broom it releases one final trace of scent. The bride appears sometime after sunrise. Conversation quiets slightly when she enters. She wears a simpler wool gown now, her hair covered beneath an ordinary veil rather than yesterday's carefully arranged bridal one. The silver brooch has been put away in her locked chest. The little iron key hangs from her girdle. She looks tired. So does the groom when he follows. No herald announces them. No musician plays. One aunt studies their faces with intense curiosity until the bride's mother gives her a look powerful enough to end the investigation. The couple sit together near the hearth. Warm bread is brought. Then pottage. Then ale. The quietness of the meal is striking after the noise of last night. Spoons scrape bowls. Logs settle in the fire. Someone coughs behind a pillar. Marriage has survived its first night. Now it must survive breakfast. The bride breaks a piece of bread and gives half to the groom almost without thinking. You remember the loaf outside the church, the sweetened wedding bread in the hall, the crumbs gathered into linen and all those hopeful little rituals surrounding food. This morning nobody comments on the gesture. Perhaps that is the most important change. Yesterday everything required witnesses. Today, sharing bread is already becoming ordinary. Near the door, departing guests begin collecting belongings. Fur-lined cloaks are shaken out, belts are tightened, pilgrim badges are pinned securely. A merchant checks his purse twice. The suspicious monk searches briefly for a glove and discovers that the dog is sleeping on it. The monk stares. The dog stares back. The glove remains politically disputed for several moments before being recovered without bloodshed. Outside, the courtyard is white with frost. Horse breath clouds the air while servants tighten girths and load bundles onto carts. The broken wheel from your arrival has been repaired with the temporary wooden brace and additional iron binding. It looks ugly but serviceable, which may be the most medieval compliment possible. Guests leave in small groups. Some carry gifts from the household. Some carry pieces of wedding bread wrapped in cloth. One unmarried cousin slips a crumb carefully into her pouch, still claiming it means nothing. A widow receives leftover meat. A pilgrim is given coarse bread for the road. Near the gate, a servant distributes small tokens to a few close guests, ribbons, sprigs of rosemary, or simple bits of cloth associated with the celebration. Such keepsakes can preserve the memory of the day long after food is eaten and candles are burned down. Some swear that keeping wedding rosemary near a household shrine protects affection. Others dry it and use it later in cooking. There is something reassuring about a charm that can eventually season dinner. The bride stands near the doorway watching people depart. Yesterday she crossed this threshold under a rain of instructions about which foot to use and whether she must avoid looking backward. This morning she steps across it several times carrying cups, speaking to servants, and helping her mother move a basket. The threshold has stopped being magical. It has become a doorway. That, too, feels important. Beyond the manor wall, carts creak toward the town. The road is still muddy beneath the frost. Travellers pull cloaks tightly around themselves and begin moving toward villages, farms, abbeys, and neighbouring estates. The musicians have already gone. The merchant leaves next. The monk walks toward the abbey road. The bride's distant relatives follow with blankets tied behind their saddles. By mid-morning the manor feels larger because fewer voices fill it. Servants dismantle the remaining trestle tables. Good cloth is folded into chests. Pewter is counted again. The household accounts will eventually record what has been spent, what remains, and perhaps which cousin still owes a promised barrel of ale. The bride enters the storeroom with the older household woman. You see the iron key turn in the lock. Inside are sacks of grain, dried peas, salted meat, jars, candles, linen, and shelves of practical abundance. Yesterday the key was ceremonial. Today she must learn which sack belongs where. She asks a question about the flour. The older woman answers. No blessing accompanies the exchange. No guests applaud. The strange traditions of the wedding feast have done their work and are already retreating into memory. The ring remains. The promises remain. The gifts remain. But life begins again in quieter forms, counting candles, checking grain, airing bedding, mending clothing, keeping the hearth alive, remembering market days, answering manor obligations, and deciding whether the winter storehouse can spare another joint of salted pork. You step outside before noon. The frost has melted where sunlight reaches the stones. Water drips from the stable roof. Somewhere beyond the fields, bells sound again from the abbey. The shaggy dog follows you to the gate. Then he stops. He looks back toward the kitchen. For the first time in 2 days, he makes the wiser choice. And you continue alone down the road as the wedding manor slowly disappears behind winter trees. The road ahead is quiet now. You walk without hurry, letting the manor fade behind you until the roof becomes only a dark shape between bare branches and then disappears altogether. The mud is softer where the morning sun has touched it, and your boots make a slow, steady sound with every step. Behind you, the feast is finished. The candles have burned low. The musicians have gone home. The last cup has been washed, the last blanket folded, and somewhere inside the manor the bride turns an iron key in a storeroom door while the groom speaks quietly with a steward near the hearth. Nothing needs to happen quickly anymore. The bells from the distant abbey drift across the fields, softer each time the wind changes. Smoke rises from cottage roofs. A cart moves far away along another road, so slowly that it seems almost still. You pull your cloak closer around you. There is warmth stored in the memory of the hall beeswax light against dark timber, rosemary crushed beneath your feet, bread broken between hands, a shared cup passing from one person to another, laughter rising beneath ancient rafters. Even the strangest customs seem gentler from this distance. Grain scattered in mud, crumbs hidden for luck, iron beneath a threshold, herbs tucked beside a marriage bed. Perhaps people believe these things because the world beyond the fire is uncertain, and small rituals make uncertainty easier to carry. Now the road grows dimmer in your imagination. The bells become quieter. The winter fields soften into shadow. There is no need to follow the travellers any farther. The manor is safe behind you. The hearth is banked. The doors are closed, and under heavy wool blankets, beneath a roof darkened by centuries of smoke, an ordinary household settles into another ordinary day. You can leave the muddy road here. Let the bells fade. Let the fire sink gently into embers. Let the old stones grow quiet. And let the medieval world drift slowly away into warm, peaceful darkness.